Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Akanksha. I'm working with Council on Energy, Environment, and Water. And today I'll be presenting our latest research piece, in which we have developed a framework to assess the economic impact of grid integration of rooftop solar on the operations of DISCOM. And it's a pleasure to share that this work has in fact been done in collaboration with BRPL, and we are grateful to Abhishek and his team who have guided us with their technical knowledge and who have provided us the data to carry out and examine this framework that we have developed for the service area. So Council on Energy, Environment and Water, it's one of South Asia's leading policy research institutions. We have about 8 areas for research that cover the energy access, renewables, low carbon pathways, and our latest initiative, the Center for Energy Finance. So for today's presentation, I'll first briefly be discussing what is the need to have such evaluation framework and what is the relevance of the results that we obtain for the Indian DISCOMs. And then we'll go a little deeper into the methodology, where we'll list out the components that we have considered and the working formula for all. And then finally discussing the results of the case study that we have done in collaboration with BRPL. So I think by now we all are aware of in India's ambitious 40 gigawatt rooftop solar target, which should be achieved by 2022. And with the consistent push from the government in terms of the policy frameworks or the incentives that are provided both to the consumers and the DISCOMs, the annual deployments are steadily increasing. However, the DISCOMs, which are a crucial part of the power sector value chain, not all of them are actually happy or supportive of this growing deployment trend. And their concerns are justified because they revolve around the following challenges. At first, it's about the prevailing billing methods for solar electricity, which they feel are a little biased toward the consumers. So all the net metering and the virtual metering guidelines that are being proposed, they are in fact incentivizing consumers without actually taking into account when that solar electricity is being generated and at what location it is being generated. So such kind of considerations, as the DISCOMs would know, are quite crucial when you're determining the price. But these are not accounted in the current solar compensation methods. And also there is an imminent revenue loss to the DISCOMs, because with the decreasing dependence of the consumers on the grid, especially those who are subsidizing the rest of the consumers, like the high-paying consumers, then there will be an imminent revenue loss to the DISCOMs. So these kind of challenges, and also with the increasing penetration of rooftop solar, as has been aptly discussed in the previous presentations, then the net infrastructure has to be upgraded to accommodate that excess generation and then transfer it or take it to other places or the point of consumptions. So with all these challenges, rooftop solar does seem like its integration to the grid does seems like a big challenge to the DISCOMs. But that's only one side of the story, as the DISCOMs would also agree, because rooftop solar and its integration to the grid is actually offering a huge potential to the DISCOMs. They can minimize on the transmission and distribution losses, because the point of generation and consumption coincide in case of rooftop solar. Then they'll also be able to manage the demand and supply well, because they'll have an accurate knowledge of what is the capacity that is being deployed in their area and how much is the generated quantum of electricity. And so they'll also be meeting their RPO targets. We have discussed in the morning session that REC mechanisms is quite prevalent in our country, and it's primarily because the existing solar capacities are not sufficient, so they often have to go to procure these REC certificates. But if we have enough capacity in the service area, then they need not to spend money there, and they can actually save a lot of money. So there are clearly benefits, but there are also challenges. And to clear this kind of confusion, there is an immediate need to have proper evaluation methods. We can actually estimate the net impact or the net economic value of the electricity that is being generated by rooftop solar. And one such approach or one such evaluation framework is that we have coined is like value of grid-connected rooftop solar. It's VGRS. So it's basically a cost and benefit analysis, which takes into account when the solar electricity is generated and at what point it is generated. So it can overcome the limitations of the existing net metering and the other billing methods that are prevalent. And also, it gives a flexibility to choose like which perspective or what stakeholders' perspective you want to analyze. So for example, you can either do it for the DISCOM, you can do it for a consumer, which is either who is a solar consumer or who is not. So, and also you can do it for the society overall, where you can incorporate the environmental aspect of rooftop solar. So with all these perspectives taken into account and all these locational and time constraints taken into account, it will definitely give a more equitable compensation for the solar electricity. And what relevance these results would have for DISCOMs is, it will, first of all, give an idea to them how to manage their demand and supply. It would also highlight what areas or what are the strategic locations where they could deploy their rooftop solar in the service area. And then it will also highlight what are the existing areas in the existing network which requires infrastructure upgradation. And above all, it will actually give them the numbers basis on which they can either ask for incentives from the regulators, or they can get a, they can get a real, a real sense of what the economic is. Is it actually a loss or a benefit? So those kind of numbers which they are just claiming there is no substantial proof to them, that can actually be accessed if we have such analysis method or such analysis being done for the DISCOMs. And before we go deep into the methodology section, we'd like to acknowledge that this is not the first time such analysis method has been developed. The utilities in the West have been proactively working on these solar evaluation methods, and especially in California and in New York, they have actually implemented these new evaluation methods. And the guiding book for these is the Benefits and Cost Analysis Handbook. But it's necessary to know that the market itself and the fiscal incentives that are provided to the DISCOMs or to the consumers in the West are not applicable to the Indian power sector. So before we actually do such analysis for the Indian power sector, it is necessary to change all the parameters and all the components that should be included or that should be excluded. So that's what we have done here. We have altered the methodology for the Indian power sector. So going into the methodology, first of all, I'll list out the cost components that we have considered. So whenever the DISCOMs would be integrating rooftop to their grid, then they have to incur some costs in that process. The first one is actually, which is we all are aware of, the revenue loss, as I discussed before also. Then the second would be in terms of the program administration cost, in which they'll either have to go for the sites for inspection, they'll issue the net metering policies and all. And finally, it will be the added distribution and transmission services cost, which will depend on the extent of solar penetration in the service area. I'll go deeper into these individual parameters later in the slides. And after there are costs, there is also ample benefits for the DISCOMs. And because of the nature of rooftop solar and its integration into the grid, it can actually impact the entire power sector value chain. So you have, at the generation level, the benefits could come from either procuring less generation capacity from the GenCos, or either by minimizing their power purchase cost. And both these capacity reduction and the power demand reduction, it will actually translate to the transmission level, where they'll be eventually procuring less transmission capacity to bring the power that they've procured from generators to the point of consumption. And finally, for the distribution part, they'll have because now the grid dependence of the consumers would decrease, they can also, the network itself could be relieved of the congestion, and so the lifetime of the distribution transformers would increase. So that kind of savings and can inform the operations, and the maintenance can also be recovered if they have more of rooftop solar connected to the grid in the service area. And on the top of these benefits, there are also additional benefits in the terms of avoided renewable energy certificate costs, which would be there to meet the RPO targets. And also, the working capital requirement would decrease, because it's basically the difference in the DISCOM's revenue to their expenses. So of course, there will be a revenue loss because of the migration of consumers from the grid to they become a prosumer. But then there will also be a reduction in DISCOM's expenses, either from the capacity procurement or for the power purchase. So it will be interesting to know how these two eventually work out, to see if the working capital is reduced at the end or not. So going now to the working formula for each of the cost and benefit components. First are the cost components. Revenue loss has been explained before, and the way we have calculated in our methodology is a very simple method. We have just estimated the difference of the consumer bills before they had a solar system, like the rooftop solar system, and after. So the difference in the consumer bills basically reflects the reduction in the DISCOM's revenue. The program administration cost, as I mentioned, they would include the recruitment of additional technical staff, which would go for site inspection and which would work out the technicalities, which would be considered to integrate rooftop solar to the grid. And then, so all these kind of additional measures that a DISCOM takes at the administrative level, they would be borne by the DISCOMs, and that cost is actually covered in the program administration cost. The added transmission and distribution services cost, they would depend what is the solar penetration in the service area. And depending on that, whether the capacity has to be augmented or a new transformer should be connected, or any kind of support that is required to manage that excess generation or the increasing penetration will be captured in the added transmission and distribution services cost. Now moving to the benefit components. The cost components, as you saw, were a little simplified. They had a very direct and specific formula. But for the benefit components, it's necessary to know how the rooftop solar is contributing to all the three: generation, transmission, and distribution levels. So the formula for evaluating a benefit is shown here. It basically consists of two components. The first component comes from rooftop solar. There you have first is the solar output, which is the effective solar output by considering the transmission, the distribution losses. Then there is a degradation factor, because this analysis will in fact be carried out for the entire lifetime of rooftop solar. So, and as we all know, it will degrade over these times, so that degradation factor and how it will be reflected in the generation should be accounted. And then comes the system coincidence factor. This is a very crucial factor because it basically integrates your rooftop solar generation to the system that we are talking, whether it's the generation, distribution, or the transmission system. So this system coincidence factor, which is a function of both the solar generation and the property of the system, when it's multiplied with the cost component for that particular system, then the product of all these basically gives you the net benefit. A little more information about the system coincidence factor. The system coincidence factor is basically what is the solar output you have at the system's peak hours. So the peak hours that we have considered, as I'll mention again in the coming slides, we have considered both the night and daytime peak. So it's just like the overall peak of the utility that we have considered at each level to compute the system coincidence factor. So the avoided generation capacity cost that we have talked about is basically when rooftop solar is present in the service area, so so the DISCOMs will be procuring less capacity from the GenCos. In doing that, they will actually be saving the fixed cost component of the power purchase cost. So to compute this benefit, as I said, we have considered the fixed cost for the DISCOMs as the cost component. Then you have the solar generation, which is available, and the system coincidence factor is actually computed at the utilities peak hours. Similar to the, when you have a less capacity cost, which is the fixed cost, then you'll also be procuring less of the power from the GenCos. So you're actually saving the variable component of your power purchase cost. So that factor is captured in the APPC, or the avoided power purchase cost. Going to the transmission capacity, so it's basically, you have less capacity which you're procuring from the GenCos, so it will be translated at the transmission level as well. And then the DISCOMs will be savings on the expenses towards the transmission utilities. So those charges, those savings are actually covered in the avoided transmission charges. And similarly, there will be savings from any kind of deferral in the capacity augmentation or installation of new network at the distribution level. So those kind of delayed or the deferred investments at the distribution level are captured in the ADCC benefit, which is the avoided distribution capacity cost. And finally, the avoided renewable energy certificate cost, which is nothing but whatever solar electricity is available to us, multiplied by the cost of all the the individual REC certificates that they are purchasing. So that will give you the ARECC. So with this background, let's go into the details of the case study. So we have already published an executive summary of our case study, and the full report will be uploaded soon on our website. And we are again thankful to BRPL for their consistent support in providing us with the data and guiding us with their technical knowledge on this study. So the analysis that we have done with BRPL is actually done across 10 distribution transformers, and we have tried to diverse these as much as possible. So we have a different capacity of the transformers, or we also have a different rooftop solar penetration just to see how it will impact the network. And then the consumer categories are also different, just to see how much the revenue loss would change with these consumers. So we have residential consumers, both in the high-paying and the low, like the subsidizing and the subsidized ones, and also the group housing societies, the single-point delivery ones. And then we have the industrial, commercial, government, all kinds of consumers were tried to capture in this analysis. So this table shows the profile of the solar which is connected to these DTs, and also how it is related to the system itself. So the CUF, which is the capacity utilization factor, is actually the performance factor for the installed solar capacity to these DTs. And it ranges, it has a diverse range. It starts from something about 11%, and in some cases it's as high as 20%. And the system coincidence factor, which is basically how the solar is supporting the utility at its peak hours, that is reflected in SCF, and it is on a conservative side. It starts somewhere around 11% and goes up till 16% in some cases. Then the distribution coincidence factor, which basically reflects how rooftop solar is supporting the distribution at its peak hours. And this is quite significant. In some cases, it's a low value, about 8%, but in some cases, it goes as high as 37%. So this is the overall result for the different distribution transformers. As you can see, most of the benefits, either it's ADCC, AWCC, ATRC, or AGCC, they are more or less similar across these DTs. So, but the revenue loss, which is a function of the consumer category, is changing quite significantly. And especially like in DT 9 and 10, which are basically the residential consumers on the lower side, which are like the low-paying residential consumers, actually when you have rooftop solar in those areas, then the revenue loss to the discoms is pretty less. So, and it's just because that they are saving on the cross-subsidy, because these are subsidized consumers, so they are actually paying less than the average cost of supply. So by deploying more rooftop solar and enabling them more, then the discoms could actually minimize their revenue loss and then maximize or capitalize on the benefits. This figure shows the correlation between the performance of the solar and the system, like how those two are related. So as you can see, these two cases, if we can focus on DT 5 and 9, so you have the revenue loss for these are kind of similar, but the benefits are drastically changing, because these benefits are actually dependent on how the solar is contributing to the utility's peak. So both the system coincidence factor is actually high. When it is on a higher side, then you can maximize these benefits. And this is what is visible for DT9. And when you have a lower system coincidence factor, then obviously these benefits will be on a little lower side. So in order to maximize your benefits, so the discoms can actually focus on deploying rooftop solar when the utility, in the areas where their peak matches with the maximum solar generation. And this figure, which is the summary of the entire analysis, so this is basically the cumulative benefits for rooftop solar, in which we can see that all these benefits are actually, they outweigh the revenue loss, which is the major cost component to the discoms. And the end result is that the discoms are actually saving about 22 paisa per unit of electricity, which is generated by rooftop solar. So now we have come to the conclusion. We have seen all the results, but when we are talking about the framework itself, there are some limitations, which we can't deny. First of all, there are multiple components involved in it, which is actually why it is more accurate and reliable. But because of these multiple components, it is a little bit difficult to comprehend it easily and requires a good knowledge about the power sector and its dynamics. The second limitation is actually coming from the data management. Data availability and actually the granularity of the data is quite crucial, and BRPL is actually it's doing amazing work in maintaining that granular data, but it might not be true for other discoms. So for an accurate assessment and the applicability of this method to other discoms, it's necessary to have accurate data and the granular data available from these discoms. And of course, there are some limitations in terms of the long-term projections because the market is volatile and it's difficult to predict these costs for an entire 25-year lifetime that we are doing this analysis for. Yet, you have seen in the results that in spite of these inherent challenges, the method is still accurate and it gives you a very good realistic assessment of what the impact would eventually look like. So before concluding the presentation, I would like to thank BRPL, of course, for their support, and our funders, Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, and our entire team of CEW. And thank you for your attention.